The town of Millhaven sat at the base of the Beartooth Mountains in southern Montana, where the winters came early and the summers lasted just long enough to make you forget how brutal the cold could be. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody else's business, where the diner on Main Street still had the same laminated menus from 1987, and where the phrase around here, "we handle things ourselves," had become less a point of pride and more a convenient excuse for looking the other way. There was a particular quality to small-town silence. It was not empty the way city people sometimes imagined it. It was full of things people had decided not to say, things they had seen, and chosen not to act on things they had known, and found it easier to file under "not my problem." In Millhaven, that silence had been building for a long time. It sat in the corners of the school hallways and the edges of the parking lot on Clearwater Road and the back booths of Carla's Diner, patient and thick and entirely comfortable with itself. Nora Briggs had lived in Millhaven for 43 years. She had raised her daughter there, buried her husband there, and when her daughter Carol died of a cardiac event 3 years ago, at 37 years old, Nora had stood in the same cemetery plot where she had stood for her husband, and she had quietly absorbed the kind of grief that has no bottom. She had then driven home, put a pot of coffee on, and begun the process of figuring out how to raise 2 granddaughters on a retired nurse's fixed income in a 3-bedroom house with a sagging front porch and a furnace that complained every time the temperature dropped below 20. She had done it, she was still doing it. That was Nora Briggs in full. Sadie was 14. She had Carol's eyes green and watchful, and a mind that worked faster than her mouth, which meant she spent a lot of time absorbing things quietly before she said anything, and when she finally did speak, it tended to be worth hearing. She liked reading. She liked her grandmother's oatmeal on cold mornings. She liked the way Millhaven looked in October when the aspens turned gold along the river road. She did not like Jefferson Middle School the way she used to. She had not liked it for roughly 2 months, which was the same length of time she had been wearing her school hoodies, even when it was warm, pulling the sleeves down past her wrists. Willa was 11. She had their grandfather's stubborn chin and their mother's laugh, and she was the kind of child who ran at life head first and let the bruises sort themselves out later. She adored her sister with a ferocity that was almost alarming in someone her size. When Sadie started coming home quieter, Willa started watching more carefully. 11-year-olds notice things. They just do not always have the words for what they see. The trouble had started in September. Trent Keller was 17, which made him 3 years older than Sadie and at least a decade older in the kind of damage he could do. He had his father's square jaw and his father's habit of standing just slightly too close to people, filling their space with his presence until they backed up without understanding why. His father was Harlan Keller, who had served as a district court judge in Millhaven County for 19 years, and who had, in that time, accumulated a particular kind of power that had nothing to do with a gavel and everything to do with knowing which envelopes to put which checks into. Trent ran with 3 boys who were smaller than him in every way that mattered. Cody, a pale, sharp-faced kid who laughed too quickly at things that were not funny, as if laughter was a transaction rather than a response. Marcus, who was big, but used the size only when Trent gave the signal, a dog trained to heel and lunge in alternation. And Dylan, who recorded everything on his phone with the enthusiasm of someone who had confused cruelty for entertainment, who had convinced himself that being the one behind the camera made him a different kind of person than the ones in front of it. He was wrong about that. He would eventually understand that, but not yet. They were not exceptional bullies. They were simply boys who had never once encountered a consequence. That absence of consequence does its own particular damage over time, not just to the people it is aimed at, but to the people who are never stopped. You can see it in the way they escalate. The increments get bigger because nothing pushes back. The cruelty gets more specific because nothing has cost them specificity. They had selected Sadie with the casual precision of predators who understood instinctively which animals had no herd. A girl being raised by her grandmother, no father in the picture, a mother in the ground. Quiet, smart enough to understand what was happening, which made it worse for her, not connected to any social group that would rally around her. It started small, the way these things always start small, because starting small is how they survive the first phase without getting stopped. Comments in the hallway. A chair scraped into her path at the lunch table. Her backpack moved from where she had set it. Then it evolved, as these things do when they meet no resistance, into something with sharper edges. Notes pushed through her locker vents. A carton of milk tipped onto her homework. Her name in bathroom stall writing that she had to walk past every day. And then 6 weeks into the school year, Trent had stood in the hallway outside her English class with Dylan's phone out and recorded a 2-minute video of himself mocking her appearance, her family, her dead mother, and had posted it with the caption, "Local orphan thinks she matters." It got 214 likes in the first hour. Sadie had deleted the app. She had not told her grandmother. Nora found out on a Tuesday evening in the 3rd week of October. She had not been looking for anything. She had been trying to find the old crockpot recipe she had texted Carol years ago. The venison stew that Sadie still asked for, sometimes the one that took all day on low heat and filled the whole house with something that smelled like safety, and she had picked up the wrong phone from the kitchen counter. Sadie's old phone, the one from before the upgrade, the one Sadie sometimes still used for music and photos because it connected to the house Wi-Fi. The video was still in the recently deleted folder. Nora watched it once. Then she set the phone face down on the counter very carefully, the way you set down a glass that might shatter if you are not precise, and she stood there for a while with both hands flat on the laminate counter and the kitchen going very quiet around her. She was 71 years old. She had held people's hands while they died. She had worked double shifts in a busy emergency room for 30 years and had seen damage in forms most people would not believe existed. She was not a woman who was easily shaken. She was shaken now. What she felt was not panic. It was not even primarily sadness, though the sadness was there, layered deep and hot in her chest. What she felt once the first wave passed was the cold, specific clarity of a woman who has just understood exactly what has been happening under her roof in her care to the child she would lay down her life for without a second thought. The clarity was not comfortable, but it was useful, and Nora had always been a woman who traded comfort for utility when the situation required it. She went to Sadie's bedroom door. The light was off. She could hear the specific quality of silence that meant her granddaughter was awake and lying still in the dark rather than sleeping. It was a different silence from sleep. Sleep has a particular softness to it, a looseness. What was happening on the other side of that door was not loose. It was tight and contained and alone. Nora opened the door. She did not turn on the light. She sat on the edge of the bed, and Sadie shifted, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "I found your old phone," Nora said finally. Sadie went still in a way that was different from how she had been still before. "I am not angry at you," Nora said. "I need you to understand that first. I am not angry at you for a single second of what I just watched." Sadie did not speak, but she turned over, and in the faint light from the window, Nora could see her face, and the expression on it was the particular mixture of relief and grief that belongs to someone who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just been found. It was an expression Nora had seen before in other contexts, at bedsides and in waiting rooms. It was the expression of a person who has been alone in something terrible and has just stopped being alone. The relief and the grief arrive at the same time, because the relief confirms that the terrible thing was real, was as bad as they thought it was not something they were wrong about, or exaggerating, or should simply have found a way to handle themselves. "How long?" Nora asked. "Since September," Sadie whispered. "Has anyone at school done anything about it?" A long pause. "I told Mrs. Putnam." "What did she say?" "She said she would look into it." Another pause. "That was 6 weeks ago." Nora sat there in the dark room with her granddaughter, and she breathed very deliberately for a few seconds. Then she said, "You should have told me. I did not want you to worry." "That is my job," Nora said quietly. "Worrying about you. That is the job I chose, and it is the job I love. You do not have to protect me from my own job." Sadie made a small sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry, but was somewhere in the complicated space between. Nora put her hand over Sadie's. "I am going to fix this," she said. She said it plainly without drama, the way she had once said, "We are going to find it," to a patient whose diagnosis took 3 rounds of testing. Not a promise made from hope, a statement made from intention. There was a difference, and Sadie heard it. The next morning, Nora put on her good cardigan, the dark green one she wore to parent-teacher conferences and doctor's appointments and occasions that required her to be taken seriously, and she drove to Jefferson Middle School. She asked for a meeting with Principal Doris Weaver. Doris Weaver was 54 years old and had been principal of Jefferson Middle School for 11 years. She was a careful woman, methodical with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the habit of folding her hands on her desk when she was working up to something she did not want to say. She listened to Nora with those hands folded and her expression professionally sympathetic for the length of time it took Nora to explain what she had found, what she had seen in the video, and what she knew had been going on for 2 months. Then Doris unfolded her hands and picked up a pen. "Trent Keller is a student here," she said carefully. "I know who he is," Nora said. "His family is very involved in the community." Doris was examining the pen rather than meeting Nora's eyes. "His father sits on the school board's advisory committee." Nora looked at the woman across the desk from her. She looked at her for a long moment, taking in the reading glasses, the beaded chain, the careful hands, the 11 years of operating inside a particular set of parameters that had been set by someone other than herself. She understood the machinery. She had encountered versions of it before in hospital administration, in insurance offices, in the rooms where decisions get made by people who are not the ones who have to live with them. "My granddaughter has been harassed, mocked, filmed without her consent, and publicly humiliated on social media for 2 months, she said. "I am here because her teacher reported nothing, and I would like to know what the school's formal response is going to be." Doris Weaver had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We take all reports of bullying seriously." "Then take this one seriously," Nora said. Her voice was level. It had the quality of still water, which is to say it appeared calm and gave no indication of the depth beneath. "I have the video. I have dates. I have my granddaughter's account of what happened and when, including the meeting she had with Mrs. Putnam that resulted in nothing. I would like to know what happens next." What happened next, Nora learned over the following 40 minutes, was a great deal of language designed to produce the sensation of action without the substance of it. An investigation would be conducted. The relevant parties would be spoken to. The school's bullying policy would be reviewed. Documentation would be filed. Each sentence contained a verb and a noun, and the implication of forward motion, and none of them contained the phrase, "Trent Keller will face consequences." Nora left the school with her green cardigan and her folded hands and drove directly to the Millhaven County Sheriff's substation on Clearwater Road. Deputy Wade Slater was in his mid-40s with the particular physical composition of a man who had once been athletic and had since allowed that to become simply large. He had been at the substation for 12 years. He and Harlan Keller had gone to Millhaven High School together, class of '98, and they had maintained in the years since a relationship that was not exactly friendship and was not exactly business, but was something that served both their purposes. This was not a thing Nora knew yet. It would become relevant later. She told him what she had told the principal, with the video cued on her phone to show him if necessary. He watched the first 30 seconds with his arms crossed and an expression she could not fully read, but that contained somewhere in it the specific blankness of a man who has already decided what he is going to say and is waiting for the person talking to finish. "Ma'am," he said when she was done, "what you are describing is teenagers being teenagers. What I am describing is harassment and public humiliation of a minor that has been ongoing for 2 months, Nora said. Kids get teased. This is not teasing. Slater leaned back in his chair. He had the unhurried quality of a man who knew he had time and she did not. Your granddaughter is 14? She is going to have to develop some thicker skin at some point. That is life. Nora looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment with those green eyes that had watched people die and watched people survive and had learned long ago to read the difference between a person who was doing their best and a person who had simply decided not to bother. She had encountered both kinds in 30 years of nursing. She knew exactly which category she was looking at now. Is there a formal complaint process? She said, or are you asking me to leave? I am suggesting. Slater said that you manage this at the family level. These things have a way of resolving themselves. She filed a written complaint at the front desk on her way out. The woman at the desk handed her a form and a pen with the manner of someone accepting a sweater at a donation drive neutrally without expectation that it would be used. Nora filled it out completely in her precise nurse's handwriting and left it on the desk with a copy of the video link and the dates she had written down. She did not know if it would be read. She did it anyway because documentation was documentation regardless of who reviewed it, and she had learned in 30 years that the things you write down matter more than the things you say, especially later. She drove home. She made dinner. She helped Willa with her geography homework and sat with Sadie while she finished a reading assignment and did not tell either of them what had happened that day because she did not want them to see the shape of what she was now beginning to understand. That the systems designed to protect children like Sadie in places like Millhaven had been quietly, systematically made comfortable with not doing so. That comfort had been built carefully over years by a man who understood that the most durable kind of protection is the kind that does not look like protection at all. She did not sleep well that night. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle in the cold and thought about the layers of what she was dealing with, which were not complicated in their essence, but were complicated in their structure. A boy who had never been stopped, a school that would not stop him, a sheriff's department that had been arranged not to stop him, a father who had built the arrangements. She thought about the tools available to her, which were fewer than she would have liked, but were not nothing. She had documentation. She had her own knowledge of the medical system in this county. She had the specific, stubborn patient intelligence that had carried her through 30 years of nursing and 3 years of raising 2 girls alone. She had enough to start. She did not sleep well the night after that either, but she used the sleeplessness to make a list. She had the kind of mind that organized itself through writing a habit from her nursing days when getting the facts on paper meant you did not miss things. The list had 3 columns: what she knew, what she needed to know, what she could do. The 3rd column was shorter than she would have liked. She was working on it. On Thursday afternoon, 4 days after she had first found the phone, Nora was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside her and the legal pad in front of her when Willa came in through the back door. She was earlier than expected. She had the expression on her face that Nora had learned over 11 years to mean she was holding something she needed to say carefully. This expression was unusual on Willa, who was not a careful communicator by nature. When Willa was being careful with something, it was because the thing itself required it. Nora put down her pen. "Come sit down." Willa sat. She put her backpack on the floor with the particular deliberateness of someone who is delaying. Then she reached into the front pocket and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper. "They put it in Sadie's locker," she said. "Sadie does not know I took it out. I did not want her to see it." Nora unfolded the paper. It said, "No mom, no dad, nobody coming for you, orphan. Not ever." Nora folded the paper back along its creases. She set it on the table. She placed her hand flat on top of it. She sat with it for a moment in the specific way she had learned to sit with difficult things, not rushing past them, not letting them flatten her, but taking their actual weight and deciding what to do with it from there. Willa was watching her with those wide eyes that were too old for her face. "Baba," she said, which was the name Sadie had invented at 2 years old and which had never been replaced. "What are we going to do?" Nora looked at her youngest granddaughter for a moment. Then she said, "What we always do, we figure it out." She got up, poured the cold coffee down the sink, made a fresh pot, and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the yard while it brewed. The aspens she had planted along the back fence when Carol was small had gone fully gold now. The mountains behind the town were already dusted with snow at the peaks. Millhaven looked from her kitchen window like the kind of postcard version of itself that people put on calendars. The disparity between how a place looked and what it actually was had never felt as pointed to her as it did standing there in October with her hand folded over a piece of notebook paper and her granddaughter sitting quietly at the table behind her. She made a decision. The next morning, Friday, she got up before Sadie and Willa and drove the route they walked to school. She parked 2 blocks from Jefferson Middle School around a corner on Birchwood Street, where her old Subaru wagon would not be immediately visible, and she waited. She waited through the school day. She had brought a thermos of coffee and a paperback she had been meaning to finish for 3 months, and she read 11 pages and drank most of the coffee and checked the time approximately 40 times in 4 hours. At 3:15, the bell rang. Students began pouring out. She watched from the Subaru with the particular focused attention of a woman who has spent 30 years watching for the thing that does not look right, the detail that is slightly off the moment that precedes the moment. At 3:22, she saw Sadie and Willa come out through the side door, the one the girls had apparently started using to avoid the main entrance. They were walking close together, Willa's arm through Sadie's, both of them with their heads slightly down, not looking at their phones, not talking, just walking with the focused forward momentum of people trying to get somewhere without being noticed. They made it 2 blocks. Trent Keller was waiting on the corner of Birchwood and Maple with 3 friends. She saw them now as a group, 4 boys, older, larger, arranged with the casual territorial precision of people who had chosen this particular spot on this particular corner for reasons that were not accidental. They had been here before. You could see it in how comfortable they looked, how established, how entirely at ease with the fact that this was their corner and not hers. Trent stepped forward as the girls came into range. She was too far to hear what was said at first. She saw Sadie's shoulders come up, the instinctive preparation of someone bracing for impact. She saw Willa step slightly in front of her sister, which was a gesture Nora recognized because it was the same gesture she herself had made in certain rooms in certain moments, and it meant, "I will take this first." The size did not matter. The intention was what it was. Then one of the other boys, Dylan with the phone, grabbed Willa's backpack from behind by the strap and yanked, and Willa went down. Nora was out of the car. She covered the distance between the Subaru and the corner of Birchwood and Maple in less time than she would have estimated she was still capable of covering. She was not running exactly. She was moving with the specific urgent economy of a woman who has made up her mind completely and is not wasting a single unit of energy on anything except forward motion. Trent Keller looked up and saw a 71-year-old woman in a dark green cardigan approaching him with the expression of someone who has run out of patience for a particular category of nonsense and is now prepared to make that fact extremely clear. He did not move. She stopped 2 feet from him. Willa was on the ground, Sadie helping her up, and neither girl said anything because they were looking at their grandmother with a complicated mixture of emotions that included fear, relief, and something that looked very much like witnessing, the look of people watching something happen that they did not expect to happen, and that they will remember. "You are Trent Keller," Nora said. It was not a question. The boy looked at her with the studied contempt of someone who has never in his 17 years met a consequence he could not outrun. He was taller than her by a significant margin. He had his friends around him. He had up to this moment in his life never had reason to take a 71-year-old woman seriously. "Who is asking?" he said. "I am the grandmother of the 2 girls you have been harassing for 2 months, Nora said. "I want you to look at me carefully because I need you to understand that what has been happening ends today." Trent's lip curled. Behind him, one of the boys made a sound that was the beginning of a laugh. "Lady," Trent said you should really go back home before you fall down and hurt yourself. Nora looked at him. She was shaking slightly, but not from fear. Anyone who had known her for long enough would have recognized the specific frequency of that tremor, which was rage running through a body that had learned over 7 decades to keep a controlled container around it. The container held. It always held. "I have been to your school," she said. "I have been to the sheriff's department. I have a video, I have dates, and I have documentation of a separate incident involving you that I am prepared to take much further than Millhaven County if I need to." She did not have the second documentation yet, but she was going to get it. She had decided that this morning at the kitchen table with the legal pad. Trent's expression shifted slightly. Not enough to show on the outside, just a micro-adjustment behind the eyes, the kind of recalculation that happens when something unexpected enters the equation. He was his father's son in that way too, always counting, always computing the angle. "You do not know what you are getting into," he said. "I have lived 71 years in this valley," Nora said. "I suspect I know exactly what I'm getting into. I'm getting into it anyway." There was a moment. The 4 boys, the old woman on the corner, the 2 girls behind her in the October afternoon light. The town going about its business around them, nobody stopping, nobody watching, except from peripheral vision, from behind curtains, from the edges of things, the particular silence of a thing that is hanging in balance. And then from Maple Street from the south they heard it. Anyone who has never been near a group of motorcycles moving together does not fully understand the quality of that sound. It is not simply loud, it is resonant. It gets into the chest. It has a physical presence that precedes the visual by several seconds, and that carries in it something about purpose and mass and direction that the body registers before the mind catches up. Nora heard it. The boys heard it. And then the engines appeared around the bend. 7 motorcycles. Heavy bikes, American iron with the throaty particular sound of engines that have been ridden for a long time and maintained with care. The men on them were not young. They wore dark jackets with a patch on the left shoulder that read, "Iron Wolves MC" in a half circle above a wolf's head. They were riding in loose formation, slightly spread the way experienced riders move on a town road when they are not in a hurry and are paying attention. The one at the front was a large man, not extraordinarily tall, but built with the solid, settled weight of someone who had worked physical work for decades and whose body had simply incorporated the effort. He had close-cropped gray-black hair, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from something harder than bone, and the particular quality of stillness that certain men develop over years of knowing what real danger feels like, and having learned to conserve energy until it is necessary to spend it. His name was Rex Dalton. He was 52 years old. He had been in the Marines for 8 years, gotten out, spent 4 years doing things he would not fully discuss, and had been with the Iron Wolves MC for 22 years. He had buried brothers in this club and in other places. He had seen enough injustice to know what it looked like at a distance, and he was looking at it right now from the seat of a motorcycle on Maple Street. He was coming from a funeral. An old friend from 2 clubs over had passed from cancer, and Rex and 7 of his men had ridden 2 hours to attend and 2 hours back, and they were taking Maple Street because Gunner's back tire had been running low, and the shop on Clearwater Road was on this route. There was nothing planned about any of what happened next. That is the thing about the moments that change things. They are almost never planned. Rex slowed without signaling, which his men understood from experience to mean something had changed. The formation compressed and slowed with him. He stopped his bike in the road and looked. He saw a row of 4 boys. He saw 2 girls, one of them with dirt on her hands. That meant she had recently been on the ground. He saw an old woman in a dark green cardigan standing between the boys and the girls with her back straight and her hands at her sides and the particular posture of someone who is going to hold their position regardless of what comes next. He turned off his engine. Behind him, Gunner killed his and then Blaze and then the others in a ripple of silence that fell over that corner of Birchwood and Maple like something being placed deliberately. In that silence, the corner became a very different place. Trent Keller turned to look at the motorcycles. His three friends turned, and the particular brand of confidence that has never been tested against something genuinely large began visibly to falter. Rex put down his kickstand. He did not hurry. He swung off the bike with the economy of someone who has done this 10,000 times, and he straightened up, and he looked at the four boys on the corner with an expression that had no readable emotion in it whatsoever, which was Trent Keller was about to understand considerably more frightening than anger. Anger has edges you can negotiate. Complete absence of readable emotion has no edges at all. You cannot find purchase on it. He walked to the curb. He stepped up onto the sidewalk. He stopped 12 feet from Trent, and he looked at him. He looked at the other boys. He looked at the woman in the green cardigan, and something in her posture, the absolute refusal to move the 71 years of standing her ground compressed into that single line of spine, made him look at her a moment longer. Then he looked back at Trent. "You been here a while?" Rex said. His voice was low, the kind of low that comes not from trying to sound threatening, but from simply not having anything to prove. "Waiting on these girls." Trent opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "That a regular thing," Rex said. One of the other boys, Cody, took a step backward without appearing to realize he had done it. The body doing what the mind could not quite admit needed doing. Rex's eyes moved to Willa's scraped palm, then back to Trent's face. The movement was slow and deliberate, the way you show someone exactly what you have seen and exactly what you think about it. Trent's jaw worked. "This is not your business." Rex let that sentence exist in the air for a moment. Then he said, "I will decide what is my business." Behind Rex, Gunnar had gotten off his bike and was leaning against it with his arms crossed. Gunnar was 48, 6'3", with forearms like bridge cable and a scar through his left eyebrow from an incident in Amarillo he preferred not to discuss. He was not doing anything. He was simply there in the way that a very large, very still thing is simply there, and the quality of his presence in that spot behind Rex was its own complete statement. Blaze, at 34, the youngest of the group, was sitting on his bike with his helmet off, watching with the expression of someone who has decided to see how this plays out and has already made peace with most of the possible outcomes. The other boys, Marcus and Dylan, had backed up to the corner. Dylan's phone was in his jacket pocket now. He did not appear to want to record anything. Trent looked at Rex. He looked at the woman in the green cardigan who had not moved. He looked at his friends, who had the expressions of people who have just realized that the thing they are standing in the middle of is considerably bigger than they understood when they chose their position. "Come on," Trent said to them finally. The bravado had been replaced by something that was trying to sound like dismissal and was not quite making it. "This is stupid." He turned and walked down Maple Street. The other three followed. Nobody on the corner spoke until the boys had turned the corner 2 blocks south and were gone. Then Nora crouched down next to Willa, who was still holding her scraped palm, and looked at it carefully with the eyes of a nurse who has looked at 30 years' worth of things that needed looking at. She pulled a small first aid kit from her cardigan pocket. She had carried one her entire working life and had never quite stopped and cleaned the scrape with practiced efficiency and put a bandage on it and said not one word about the size of what had just happened. The scrape needed the bandage. Everything else could wait a moment. Sadie watched her grandmother do this. Then she looked up at Rex Dalton, who was still standing on the sidewalk with his hands at his sides and that same unreadable expression, and she said, "Thank you." Rex looked at her. He looked at the girl with the green eyes and the quiet face and the school hoodie pulled down to her wrists, even though the afternoon was mild, and he said, "You okay?" "Yes, sir," Sadie said. Her voice was very level, steadier than a 14-year-old's voice had any particular right to be. He noted it. Nora stood up from where she had been crouching over Willa. She looked at Rex. The two of them regarded each other for a moment, the old woman and the biker, both of them having spent enough years in proximity to damage to recognize it in various forms, and both of them having spent enough years as the kind of person who does not simply walk past it. "Thank you," Nora said. Rex nodded once. He looked down at his boots for a moment, then back at her. He was about to say something when the sunlight caught the ring on Willa's jacket zipper. Not Willa's ring. A ring she had found on the sidewalk 2 months ago that she wore on her zipper pull because it was too big for her finger. A gold ring with a crest on it. Rex's eyes went to it and stayed there. He recognized the crest. It was the Keller family seal. A specific emblem that Harlan Keller had commissioned for his family 20 years ago, which appeared on stationery on a plaque by his office door and on the signet ring he had given his son when the boy turned 16. Rex knew that seal. He knew it the way you know the face of something you have seen in the worst moment of your life. 15 years ago, Colt Ryder had been one of the founding members of Iron Wolves MC. Colt had been Rex's closest friend since the Marines. The person who had understood without explanation what the years after service had done to Rex. The person who had built the club with him from a handshake and a shared philosophy about what brotherhood was supposed to mean. Colt had been arrested on weapons charges in 2009 that Rex had known with the absolute certainty of a man who knows his brother's soul were fabricated. The evidence had been arranged too neatly. The witnesses had been too cooperative. The judge had ruled too quickly and too completely. The judge had been Harlan Keller. Colt had served 4 years. He had come out of prison broken in the specific way that certain men break, not physically, not financially, but in the place where the belief that the world has any basic fairness lives. He had drunk himself to death in a trailer outside Billings in 2015 at 41 years old alone. Rex had stood at that grave too. He looked at the ring on Willa's zipper. He looked at the corner where Trent Keller had disappeared. He looked at the old woman in the green cardigan who was watching him with the specific attention of someone who has noticed that something has shifted in his expression and is deciding what to make of it. "That boy," Rex said slowly. "His last name Keller." Nora looked at him steadily. "His father is Judge Harlan Keller." Rex stood there for a moment in the October afternoon with his boots on the sidewalk and the sound of his bikes cooling behind him, and 15 years of something that had never been resolved sitting very quietly in his chest. "Ma'am," he said finally, and his voice had changed in a way that was subtle but unmistakable. It had acquired the quality of something that has just found its bearing. "I think we should talk." Nora looked at him for a moment. She looked at him with the careful attention of a woman who has spent a career reading people in high-stakes moments and has become very good at understanding the difference between a man who means what he says and a man who is performing the meaning of it. "Walk with me," she said. She turned and began walking south on Birchwood Street toward the diner on the corner of 5th that had been there since before she had moved to Millhaven, and Rex fell into step beside her with the slight adjustment of pace that very large people make when walking alongside someone considerably shorter. Behind them, without being told, Sadie took Willa's hand and followed at a short distance. Behind all 4 of them, Gunnar and Blaze exchanged a look over their bikes, and Gunnar settled back against his handlebars, and Blaze pulled out his phone with the expression of someone who has decided not to go anywhere. The diner was called Carla's, which was the name of the woman who had opened it in 1974, and whose daughter now ran it with the same menus and the same coffee and the same particular shade of orange vinyl on the booth seats that had been there since before most of the town's current residents were born. At 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, it held 7 customers. Most of them retired men who came for the coffee and stayed for the company, and a waitress named Beth who recognized Nora and brought her usual without being asked. Rex sat across from Nora in the corner booth that faced the door, which was where Rex always sat. She noted this without commenting on it. Old habits from old reasons. She had them too. She always sat facing the room. You saw more that way, and seeing more had saved her from small disasters on more occasions than she could count. He ordered black coffee. He wrapped his hands around the mug when it came and looked at her. "Tell me what has been happening," he said, "all of it." So she told him. She told him about September and the slow escalation, about the video about the school and the sheriff's department, and the careful bureaucratic language that produced the sensation of action without any of its content. She told him about the note in the locker, about the specific cruelty of targeting a girl whose mother was dead, about Sadie lying in the dark with the light off and not expecting anyone to come. She told him these things in the direct, factual way she had learned to give difficult information without unnecessary softening, because unnecessary softening was its own kind of disrespect. You softened things for people who could not handle the actual weight. Nora had learned to read people carefully enough to know when that was true and when it was not. Rex listened the way certain people listen, without filling silences, without nodding along performatively, without the small encouragements that indicate someone is waiting for their turn to speak. He just listened. It was a specific and practiced kind of attention, the kind that comes from years of being in situations where missing something costs more than you can afford. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "Slater," he said. The name came out flat. "Deputy Wade Slater, yes." Rex turned his coffee mug a quarter turn. He did this twice slowly, a thinking habit. "Slater and Harlan Keller went to Millhaven High together, class of '98. They have been close since." Nora looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Because I have had occasion to learn things about Harlan Keller," Rex said. He paused. Then, with the economy of someone who does not often offer personal information, he said, "He put a friend of mine in prison for something he did not do. My friend did not survive it." Nora was quiet for a moment. She understood from the way he said it that this was not metaphorical. The weight of survived it when it means what it means here. "I am sorry," she said. Rex dipped his chin once, not acknowledgement of the apology exactly, more like the gesture of someone accepting that a thing is what it is, that it will not be different for being acknowledged, but that the acknowledgement is still its own thing and deserves its own moment. "The witnesses in that case were arranged," he said. "Evidence was filed that had no chain of custody anyone could explain. Keller ran that courtroom like the outcome was decided before anyone walked in. I could not prove it at the time. I tried." He looked at the window at the afternoon light on Birchwood Street. "I still have the files." Nora absorbed this. A nurse's mind organized information quickly, had been doing it for 30 years under pressure. "So Keller has been conducting himself this way for at least 15 years, she said. "Longer, probably. He is careful. He does not take risks he has not already managed." Rex looked back at her. "His son taking those risks with your granddaughter, that is interesting." "Trent is 17, Nora said. "He has learned his whole life that there is no such thing as a consequence." Rex nodded slowly. "That is the thing about that. Sooner or later someone teaches him differently." The waitress brought refills without asking. Outside, the October light was going amber, the long, late afternoon gold that only exists in October and seems to specifically illuminate everything that is fragile and worth protecting. There was something about that light that was particular to Montana, the way it came down at an angle between the mountains and made ordinary things look briefly permanent. Sadie and Willa were in the booth nearest the door, sharing a plate of fries that Beth had brought over without being asked. Willa was eating with the methodical focus of an 11-year-old who has processed her feelings through the medium of food. Sadie was looking out the window with that watchful, thinking expression that was so much like her mother's that Nora had to sometimes physically look away from it. The resemblance was not painful every time, but sometimes it was close. Rex glanced at the girls. He looked at the older one for a moment, at the hoodie, the way she sat slightly inward, the vigilance that was present in even her stillness. "She been like that a while?" he asked quietly. "Since September," Nora said. Before the school saw what was happening, she had already learned not to expect them to. Rex turned the coffee mug again, a small, precise motion like adjusting the setting on something. "Kids should not have to know that," he said. "Not at 14. "No," Nora said. "They should not. There was a pause in which they both understood each other with the slight specific warmth of people who have reached the same conclusion through very different roads and have arrived unexpectedly at the same place. Rex set down the mug. "What do you need?" he said. It was a simple question asked plainly, and it was, Nora thought, exactly the right question. Not "what can I do," which contained an embedded offer that might not match the need. Not "let me handle this," which contained an embedded assumption that she could not handle it herself and had been waiting for someone else. "What do you need?" A question about her assessment of the situation, with the answer left entirely to her. "I need evidence," she said. "The school did nothing. The sheriff is compromised. If I am going to take this somewhere that Keller does not control, I need documentation that goes beyond my granddaughter's word against his son's." "What kind of documentation?" "I treated a child 2 years ago," Nora said. "Brought in by his mother, minor car accident. The story did not quite fit the injury. I documented what I saw, which was more consistent with a secondary impact than a single initial collision. I remember the case because I was troubled by it afterward, and did not do enough with that trouble." She paused. Trent Keller was 16 at the time. The incident was closed by the sheriff's department within a week with no charges. Rex went still in a different way. A different kind of still from before. The kind that means something has connected. "You have those medical records," he said. "I have my own documentation from the time notes I made in my personal file. The professional records are at Clearwater Medical. I cannot access them without cause, and an unofficial request from me would flag immediately." She looked at him. "But there is a way to build a file around the incident that does not require me to pull the records directly. If I can establish the pattern through other means, the records become supporting evidence rather than the foundation." Rex looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression that was still mostly unreadable, but contained at its edges something that was not quite admiration, but was adjacent to it. The specific regard a person develops for another person who has walked into a hard thing with their eyes open and already worked out the next 3 moves. "Gunner," he said conversationally, the way you say the name of a person you know is nearby. The diner door opened, and Gunner Holden came in, ducking slightly out of habit, despite the door being large enough to clear him, and folded himself into the end of the booth beside Rex. He looked at Nora with the direct measuring attention of a man who is deciding something about a person he has not met before. "He hears everything I hear," Rex told her. "He has been with me 20 years. Whatever you are comfortable saying in front of me, you can say in front of him." Nora looked at Gunner Holden, who looked back at her with the patient, watchful quality of a very large man who has learned to let other people fill the silence, and who is comfortable with however long that takes. "What can you do?" she asked him, "with 2 years of public records, a closed incident report, and the name of a child who was brought into a Millhaven County emergency room in September of 2022. Gunner glanced at Rex, then back at Nora. The corner of his mouth moved slightly, the approximation of something that, in a less reserved man, would have been a smile. "Quite a bit," he said. His voice was deep and deliberate, each word arriving with the quality of something considered before being released. "Give me a few days." Outside on Birchwood Street, the afternoon light was fully gold, now the aspens along the median strip luminous with it, the mountains catching the last of it on their snow-dusted peaks. A Friday afternoon in October in Millhaven, Montana, ordinary as they came. Except that in the corner booth of Carla's diner, a 71-year-old woman and 2 men who most of the town would have crossed the street to avoid were making plans with a shared and specific determination that had the quality of something that had been a long time building and had now finally found its moment. Sadie looked over from her booth at the window at the street at the fading gold of the afternoon. She could see her grandmother at the corner table with the 2 large men. She could see from this distance and angle not the words, but the quality of the conversation, the attention paid, the specific seriousness of people who are talking about something real. She did not know exactly what was being planned, but she had her grandmother's eyes, and she knew how to read the difference between a conversation that might produce something and one that already had. She felt for the first time in 2 months the small and specific sensation of not being entirely alone in what she was carrying. It was not safety yet, but it was the beginning of the conditions that make safety possible. Willa ate the last of the fries and looked up and saw the men at her grandmother's table and then looked at her sister. Sadie was looking at the table and not the window anymore, and whatever was on Sadie's face was different from what had been there for the past 2 months. Willa could not have named the difference exactly, but she felt it. She looked at her scraped palm with the neat bandage on it. She thought we are going to be okay. She was not sure why she thought it, but the thought was there solid and unexpected, and she held on to it. Rex Dalton stood up from the booth, dropped 2 20s on the table without looking at them, and said to Nora, "I will be in touch." He did not say when. He did not need to. He walked to the door and held it for Gunnar, and as he passed the girl's booth, he stopped for a moment and looked at Sadie. She looked back at him. He said nothing. The look said everything it needed to say. "I saw what they did. I saw you. You are not invisible." And then he walked out into the gold October afternoon and put on his helmet and started his engine, and the Iron Wolves MC pulled out onto Birchwood Street one by one and were gone around the corner. The diner went back to its normal sounds: the ceiling fan, the coffee machine, the low conversation of the retired men at the counter who had been pretending not to listen and who now pretended not to have been pretending. Nora sat for another minute with her coffee. She was making notes in her head. She had a list to update. Then she looked over at her granddaughters, at Willa's bandaged palm, and Sadie's face, which had in it something new and tentative and worth protecting, and she said, "Let's go home." 3 days passed without incident. This was not because the situation had resolved itself, but because the situation was pausing to breathe the way a fire pauses when the wind shifts before finding a new direction. Nora used the 3 days. She called her contact at Clearwater Medical, a woman named Ruth, who had worked admissions there for 20 years, and who owed Nora the specific kind of favor that cannot be repaid in full, but can be partially addressed. Nora did not ask Ruth to pull any records. She simply mentioned that she was looking into an incident from September of 2022 involving a minor brought in by his mother, and she mentioned the name of the child, and she asked Ruth informally whether she remembered anything. Ruth remembered quite a bit. She remembered because the mother had come in shaking, and the story she gave for the child's bruised ribs did not account for the pattern of the bruising, and Ruth had flagged it to the attending physician, who had documented it appropriately. She remembered because Deputy Slater had come in 2 days later and spoken to the records department, and after that conversation, the file had been reclassified, and a subsequent request for information had been denied on grounds of a processing error that nobody could quite explain. Ruth told Nora all of this over the phone in 12 minutes. She did not ask what Nora intended to do with the information. They had known each other long enough. On the same day, Gunnar Holden drove to the county courthouse and spent 4 hours in the public records room with a laptop and the focused energy of a man who has learned through long necessity how to follow a paper trail to the end. What he found was not dramatic on its face. It was the ordinary tedium of public documents, land transfers, and court filings and business registrations. But patterns emerged in the accumulation the way they always do when you look long enough and do not let yourself be discouraged by the length. Money moving through LLCs that did not appear to do anything. A sheriff's department budget line that had been quietly increased 3 years running without any corresponding increase in staffing or equipment that appeared in any other record. A building permit that had been approved in 48 hours on a project that should have taken 60 days minimum. Small things, repeated things, the grammar of an arrangement. At the center of all of it, in the way that the load-bearing wall is at the center of a house, was Harlan Keller. Gunnar brought his notes to Rex that evening. Rex read them twice at the kitchen table of the Iron Wolves clubhouse, which was a converted barn outside Millhaven that had been insulated, wired, and furnished with the functional aesthetic of people who cared more about comfort than decoration. He read without expression, which was how Rex read anything that mattered, letting the information settle before he decided what he thought about it. What he thought was, this is bigger than a 17-year-old boy on a street corner. This is the infrastructure that makes 17-year-old boys like that possible. This is what you build when you want to make sure that nothing you or your children do ever has to answer for itself. The boy was just the visible part. The machine underneath him had been running for years, quietly, smoothly, in the way that machines run when they have been well maintained by people who know what they are doing. He called Nora. She answered on the second ring, which was always how she answered. Gunnar has been through the public records, Rex said. What we have so far is suggestive but not conclusive. We need the medical documentation to anchor the obstruction charge. I know, Nora said. I have been thinking about how to get it through legitimate channels. There is a lawyer in Billings who has been building a civil rights case involving the Millhaven County Sheriff's Department. She has been looking for plaintiffs and supporting evidence for 2 years. Rex was quiet for a moment. How do you know that? I read, Nora said. The Billings Gazette ran a story in August. I clipped it. Another pause. Rex could hear in the background on Nora's end the sound of the television low in the next room and a child's voice, Willa asking something that Nora answered with a murmur before coming back to the phone. The ordinary texture of a household at 8 o'clock on a weeknight, those domestic sounds. Rex sat in his empty kitchen and listened to them for a moment without meaning to. The lawyer's name is Andrea Flynn, Nora said. I called her this afternoon. She wants to meet. Rex had the specific sensation of a thing gaining momentum. He had felt it before in both good and bad forms and had learned to recognize it for what it was. Not something you created, but something that was already moving and was offering you the choice of whether to be part of it. When, he said. Friday, Nora said. In Billings. I would like you and Gunnar there if you are willing. We will be there, Rex said. He was quiet for a moment, and she was quiet on her end, and in that quiet were the 3 days of parallel work they had both been doing and the shared understanding that what they were building together was something that would matter. That kind of shared understanding between people who do not know each other well yet has a particular quality. It is provisional but real. It says, I am operating on the assumption that you are who you appear to be. I am not sure yet, but I am acting as though. How is Sadie? He asked. Nora took a moment before she answered. She is watching, she said finally. The way she watches everything. I think she is trying to decide whether to let herself believe this is actually going to change. Smart kid. Very, Nora said. She gets it from her mother. A small silence. Rex turned his coffee mug. My mother used to say that the hardest thing about hope is that it costs you something to carry it. You use energy on it. You make yourself available to be heard again. He stopped. It was more than he usually said to someone he had met 4 days ago. She was right. She was also the kind of woman who carried it anyway. Nora did not say anything for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. Tell Sadie that if you get the chance. They hung up. Rex sat in the quiet kitchen for a while after, with his hands wrapped around the coffee mug that had gone cold, thinking about Colt Ryder, who had died believing that no one was coming, and about a 14-year-old girl in a hoodie on a street corner who was in the process of learning the opposite. He hoped she got to finish learning it. The trouble escalated on Wednesday. Nora did not find out about it until after school, when she was in the kitchen making the venison stew that Sadie had asked for, and Sadie came through the back door and put her backpack down with the specific, controlled care that meant something had happened that she was managing. Nora turned from the stove. She looked at her granddaughter. What was it today? She said. Sadie sat down at the kitchen table. She put both hands flat on the surface and looked at them for a moment. Then she looked up. They found out, she said, about someone asking questions, about a lawyer in Billings. Nora went still. How? Trent told me. At school. In the hallway. Sadie's voice was steady, but her jaw was tight. He said his father knows everything that is happening, and it does not matter because his father owns this town, and if my grandmother does not drop whatever she is doing, she is going to lose the house. Nora turned back to the stove. She turned down the heat. She thought for a moment methodically the way she organized everything that needed organizing. Then she turned around again and sat across from Sadie at the kitchen table. "Did he touch you?" she said. "No." "Did he threaten you specifically?" "He said the orphan's grandmother should be careful about stairs at her age." Sadie's voice was very flat when she said this. The flatness of someone who has processed the malice out of a thing and is presenting you only with its factual contents stripped of the emotional charge because the emotional charge was not going to be useful right now. Nora reached across the table and covered Sadie's hands with hers. "Look at me," she said. Sadie looked at her. "What Trent Keller knows is that we are doing something," Nora said. "What he does not know is how far along we are or exactly what we have. If his father is worried, that means we have already done enough to worry him. Worried people make mistakes. That is not a threat to us. That is information we can use." Sadie looked at her grandmother, at the 71-year-old face, the steady green eyes, the hands that were warm and entirely present. She was looking at a woman who was not afraid, and the not afraid was not performed, it was structural. Nora Briggs was not afraid because she had already assessed the situation and made her choices and was operating within those choices. That was different from bravery in the dramatic sense. It was better than that. "Are we actually going to be okay?" Sadie asked. Not dramatically, just genuinely. The real question underneath all the others. "I do not know everything that is coming," Nora said honestly. "I know that I am not stopping. And I know what I have and who is helping me have it. That is what I can give you right now." She paused. "Is that enough?" Sadie thought about it for a moment. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think that is enough." Willa came in through the back door, dropped her backpack and announced that she was starving, and the kitchen filled up again with the ordinary noise of an evening, and Nora went back to the stew. And Sadie set the table and the house held them the way it had been holding them for 3 years, steady and unglamorous and entirely sufficient. 3 blocks away in the front office of Keller and Associates, Harlan Keller was on the phone with Wade Slater. His voice, for a man who prided himself on his composure, was doing something that approximated controlled anger. It was the voice of a person who is not yet afraid, but is aware that the distance between not afraid and afraid has recently decreased. "I want to know who she is talking to," he said. "I want to know what she has." Slater's voice on the other end, "Harlan, she is a retired nurse." "She is a retired nurse who spent yesterday afternoon at the library on the county records database and made a phone call to Billings 3 days ago. I want to know what she found." A pause. "And I want to know who those bikers are and what their involvement is. The Iron Wolves they are just passing through. They are not passing through Wade. They stopped, and they talked to her, in the diner." Keller's voice went quieter, which was when it was most dangerous, the way a river gets most dangerous, not when it is loudest, but when it goes still, and the current is all underneath. "Dalton, the one at the front, pull his record." Slater was quiet for a moment. "Rex Dalton from Clancyville. He was in the—" "I know who he is," Keller said. His voice had acquired a specific tension, the tone of someone who has just remembered something they had not thought about in a while and is now thinking about it very hard. "Pull everything. I want it by morning." He hung up the phone. He sat in his office for a long time in the particular quiet of a powerful man who has just recognized the shape of something he had thought was safely behind him. The past has a way of becoming present when the conditions are right. He had known on some level that the Ryder case had loose ends. He had managed them carefully for 15 years. But loose ends, if you pull them, do not simply shorten. They connect to other things. He looked at the window. The October dark was full outside. He thought about the woman in the green cardigan who had stood her ground on that street corner without flinching, and he felt beneath the controlled surface of his composure something that was the beginning of a different calculation. The call he made to Phil McCready the next morning was one he had been putting off for 14 years. Not because he did not want to make it, because he had not been sure until now that the moment was right. Rex had learned through experience that there were calls you could make too early that would close a door, and calls you could make at the right time that would open one. Phil McCready was a man who had been living for 14 years with the specific particular weight of having stayed silent about something he knew was wrong. Rex had seen that weight on him in the courtroom during the Ryder trial. He had seen it in the way Phil held his body when he logged the altered evidence, the slight forward tilt that meant he was carrying something he was not sure how to put down. Rex had not called then because calling then would have made Phil a target before there was anything he could do for Colt. He had not called in the years after because Colt was gone, and reopening it felt for a long time like something he was doing for himself rather than for Colt, and he had not been sure he had the right. He was sure now. Phil answered on the fourth ring cautiously, the way people answer numbers they do not recognize when they have been carrying something they do not want to discuss. "Phil," Rex said. "It is Rex Dalton." A long pause. Not the pause of a man who does not remember. The pause of a man who has been waiting for this call and is deciding how to begin. "Rex," Phil said. His voice was the voice of someone who has rehearsed a conversation 100 times and is now discovering that the rehearsal was not quite adequate for the actual moment. "There is a lawyer in Billings," Rex said. "She is building a case. It is the right time." Another pause, shorter this time. "I know," Phil said. "I have been reading the Gazette." They talked for 20 minutes. By the end, Phil had agreed to drive to Billings the following week. He said, "I should have done this a long time ago." Rex said, "You are doing it now." Phil was quiet for a moment, and then said, "I kept his name in my head every day. Like that counted for something." Rex said, "It does not count for nothing." Phil said, "I want it to count for more than that." Rex said, "It will." He hung up and sat with that for a while. With the 15 years and the weight of them and the specific quality of gratitude that belongs to a thing that has been waiting a long time to move and is finally moving, he thought about Colt. The way Colt laughed, which was big and unself-conscious in a way Rex had never managed. The way Colt rode, which was fast and slightly reckless in a way that Rex had always pretended to disapprove of. The way Colt had said the last time Rex visited him in prison, "Maybe it is just how it is," and Rex had said, "No, it is not." And Colt had looked at him with that worn-out look and said, "You do not have to keep carrying this, brother." Rex had said he was not carrying it for Colt. He was carrying it because it was true. Colt had almost smiled at that. Almost. He was still carrying it, but its direction had changed. He put his phone down and went to make coffee and thought about the thread that connected a retired nurse in a dark green cardigan to a dead man in a trailer outside Billings, to a 14-year-old girl in a school hoodie, to a case that had been sitting in state archives for 15 years, waiting for someone to look at it carefully enough. Threads connect. That was what Nora had said. He was beginning to understand what she meant. Friday in Billings was cold and bright, the kind of October day that made the mountains look close enough to touch, that made the air taste like altitude and intention. Nora drove the 2 hours with the radio on low and her coffee in the cup holder, and her thoughts organized in the patient, methodical way she organized everything that mattered. She went through the facts in order. She went through what she had, what she still needed, what Flynn would likely ask. She did not rehearse what she would say because she did not rehearse things. She knew what she knew. She would say it when asked. Rex and Gunnar were already at the coffee shop when she arrived at a corner table, Gunnar with a laptop open to what appeared to be an organized file of documents in several folders. They both stood when she walked in. She noted this without comment. It was not performance. It was just how certain men were raised, and some of them kept it. Andrea Flynn was 39 years old, with the kind of focused, precise energy that comes from spending a decade being told a case is not there yet and continuing to build it anyway. She arrived 3 minutes after Nora in a dark coat with a briefcase, and she shook Nora's hand with both of hers and Rex's with one, and sat down with the specific directness of someone who values time as a finite resource and does not like to waste it on preamble. "Before we get into the specifics," she said, "I want to understand what each of you is bringing to this and what you want out of it." She looked at Nora. "You are the grandmother. Your granddaughter is the victim of ongoing harassment protected by local institutional corruption. What is the outcome you are looking for?" "I want Trent Keller to face a consequence," Nora said. "And I want the system that has protected him from consequences to be on record." She paused. "I want Sadie to be able to walk to school without dreading it." Flynn nodded. She looked at Rex. "And you?" Rex looked at her directly. 15 years ago, a judge in Millhaven County fabricated evidence to convict my closest friend of charges he did not commit. My friend died in prison effectively. I want that record examined." He paused. "And I want what is happening to that kid to stop." Flynn looked between the two of them for a moment. Something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly, but acquiring depth. The look of someone who has just understood that the scope of what she is dealing with is larger than the intake description suggested and who is adjusting her framework accordingly. "All right," she said, "show me what you have." They spent 3 hours in that coffee shop. Gunnar walked Flynn through the documents methodically, answering her questions with the precise, minimal specificity of someone who has worked with lawyers before and knows that giving more than you are asked gives them less room to work with. Each document was presented with its source and its relevance stated plainly and then set aside. Nora provided her own account and her notes from Ruth and her documentation of what had happened with Sadie, the timeline, the dates, the specific failures of the system to respond. Rex laid out the Colt Ryder case from memory, and Flynn cross-referenced his account with several documents she had pulled from state archives that corroborated dates and procedural irregularities that Rex had not known she had already found on her own, which meant this case had been on her radar in some form for longer than the Millhaven connection. By the end of the 3 hours, Flynn had 2 yellow legal pads full of notes and the quality of controlled excitement that good lawyers develop when they have found what they have been looking for. "The medical records from the 2022 incident are the keystone," she said. "If the documentation shows what Ruth remembers, and if Slater's visit to records is in the system's log, that is obstruction of evidence in a child endangerment case. Combine that with the pattern Gunnar has traced in the public records, and we have a picture of systemic corruption that makes Keller a liability to the county, not an asset. His continued protection of these arrangements would itself become a problem for the county commissioners." "Can you get a subpoena for the records?" Nora asked. "I can get a subpoena," Flynn said, "but not instantly. These things take time, and time means Keller has the opportunity to move things around if he becomes aware of the filing. I would rather build the surrounding case well enough that when we do file, there is no question of outcome." She looked at Nora. "I know that is not the answer you want right now. Your granddaughter is still in that school." "Yes," Nora said. "Keep documenting everything, every incident, dates, times, witnesses. If there are witnesses who are not Trent's friends, people who have seen things and have not come forward because there was no mechanism that felt safe." She looked at Rex. "And if you can find anyone willing to speak about the Ryder case, anyone who was involved in that prosecution, that would help considerably." Rex nodded once. He was already thinking about it. There was one person, a man named Phil McCready, who had been the clerk of court during the Ryder trial and who had moved to Bozeman afterward. Rex had not spoken to Phil in 14 years. Phil had known the outcome was wrong. Rex had been able to see it on his face in the courtroom, the specific expression of a man who is complicit in something and knows it and has not yet found the version of himself that is willing to say so out loud. It was worth a drive to Bozeman. The meeting ended. They stood outside on the Billings sidewalk in the October wind, and Flynn shook hands all around and said she would file the preliminary motion within 2 weeks. After she was gone, the three of them stood for a moment in the particular quiet that follows an important meeting where things have moved in the right direction and you are beginning to feel the shape of what is possible. Gunnar looked down the street. "That woman knows what she is doing," he said, which from Gunnar was the highest available designation. "She does," Rex agreed. Nora pulled her cardigan around her and looked at the mountains visible at the end of the street, the Beartooths white at the top now. 2 hours east in Mill Haven, her granddaughters were in school. Sadie was watching the way Sadie always watched, waiting to see what shape the future was going to take. "I need to get back," Nora said. Rex looked at her. "I will follow you," he said, "in case." She looked at him for a moment. "All right," she said. On the drive back 40 minutes out of Billings on the stretch of 2-lane highway where the valley opens up and you can see for 30 miles in every direction, Nora's phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She glanced at it. Sadie's number. She answered on speaker. "Baba." Sadie's voice was different. Controlled in the way that means the thing underneath the control is not controlled at all, that all available energy is going into maintenance and nothing is left for anything else. "Willa is not here." Nora's hands tightened on the wheel. "What do you mean she is not there?" "I mean she was not at the end-of-day meeting spot. I waited 20 minutes. She is not answering her phone." A pause. "And Trent was at school today. He was watching me at lunch. He was smiling." The mountains were very clear and very still in the October afternoon. The road stretched straight ahead. Rex was behind her 2 car lengths back, and she could see his headlight in the mirror. He was watching. He had been watching the whole drive. "Did anyone see her last?" Nora said. "Her teacher says she left with the rest of the class at the end of 6th period. That was an hour ago." Sadie's voice cracked slightly on the last word, and then steadied itself again. It was a remarkable effort, that steadying. "I asked Dylan where Trent went after school, and he said he did not know, but he was looking at his phone when he said it, and he would not meet my eyes." Nora thought. She thought with the clarity that comes under pressure, the old emergency room quality of mind that organized information quickly and moved to action without the luxury of deliberation. No wasted motion, no extra seconds spent on the fear because the fear was not useful right now, and there would be time for it later if it turned out to be warranted. "I need you to stay at the school office," she said. "Do not leave the building. Tell the office what is happening right now." "They will not." "Tell them anyway. I need you inside and accounted for." She paused. "Sadie." "Yeah, I am coming and I am calling Rex." She hung up. She hit Rex's number in her recent calls list. He picked up immediately. "Willa is missing," she said. "I think Trent has her. School storage building's east property line." There was a brief silence that contained no panic, only the rapid functional computation of a man assessing a situation and its components. Then Rex said, "Blaze is already in Mill Haven. I am calling him now." Blaze Carver had gone back to Mill Haven 2 days ago for personal reasons, involving a radiator that needed replacing, and had wound up staying longer than planned for other reasons that were none of anyone's business. He was sitting in the Iron Wolves local safe house on Creek Road when Rex called. He put down what he was doing and was out the door in 30 seconds. Rex had said Jefferson Middle School. Storage buildings on the east property line. Trent Keller. Find the girl. Blaze did not need more than that. He knew the school. He had driven past it multiple times in the past week, maintaining what Rex called ambient awareness of the situation. He knew the east property line had a row of 4 storage buildings accessible from the service road behind the school buildings that held groundskeeping equipment and seasonal materials and were generally locked. He pulled up to the service road in 4 minutes. 3 of the 4 buildings had locks that had been there for years, weathered and worn. The 4th had a padlock that was newer, noticeably newer, a detail that Blaze had been trained to register because new locks on old buildings mean the old lock has been replaced, and replacing a lock means someone has the key and wanted to control who else does not. He He put his hand flat against the door of the fourth building. From inside, very faint but distinct, came a sound. Not quite a voice. More like a presence on the other side of a barrier making itself known. He tried the padlock. Locked. He looked at the hasp, old steel installed in the mid-90s, based on the look of it screwed into wood that had been weathering for 30 years. Blaze was 34 years old and had spent his 20s doing manual labor and understood the physics of old steel hasps in weather-softened wood with the practical knowledge of someone who had opened several things he was not supposed to open over the years. He braced himself and pulled with the specific angle that would torque the hasp screws rather than the lock itself. The hasp came out of the wood with a sound like something being extracted. Willa was sitting against the back wall of the building with her knees drawn up to her chest and her phone in her lap, battery dead. Her face was tear-tracked. But when the light came in and she saw who was standing in the door, her expression shifted immediately from fear to something that was not quite relief and not quite fury, but was very much both compressed into the 11-year-old face with the stubborn chin. "Finally," she said. Her voice was scratchy. She had been in there for approximately 90 minutes. "I have been counting maintenance equipment for an hour and a half. There are 42 items if you count each individual rake separately, which I did." Blaze crouched in the doorway. He looked at the 11-year-old with her dead phone and her scraped elbows and her jaw set at an angle that reminded him completely unexpectedly of Rex, when Rex had decided something and was waiting for the world to catch up. "You okay?" he said. "I am fine," Willa said, with the clipped precision of someone reporting a status rather than sharing a feeling. "I have been louder places than this. I just could not get the door open." She looked at the hasp lying on the ground outside. "He used a new padlock." "I noticed," Blaze said. "Are Baba and Sadie okay?" "They are fine. They are on their way." Willa stood up. She dusted off her jeans. She picked up her dead phone and put it in her pocket. Then she looked at Blaze. "He said it was a prank," she said. "Trent. He said the maintenance person needed to get in and that I should wait in there for a second, and then he locked the door and walked away." Her voice was still very steady, but her hands at her sides were shaking slightly, the body insisting on having its own reaction regardless of what the mind decided. He was smiling the whole time. He really wanted me to be scared. Blaze looked at this 11-year-old child who had spent 90 minutes locked in a maintenance shed in October and who was presenting him with a factual account of events with shaking hands and a jaw that had not buckled. "Were you?" he said. A pause. "A little," Willa said. "But mostly I was just mad." Something in Blaze's face shifted. He was not a man given to demonstrations of emotion. Rex did not run that kind of club. But he looked at this child, this small, shaking, not quite crying girl who had refused to give Trent Keller the satisfaction of a breakdown, and he felt something in his chest that was old and specific and had to do with a younger sister. He had not protected well enough, and a long road back from that, and the particular meaning of being this time the one who came. "You did good," he said. "Being mad instead of scared is the right call." Willa looked at him. She seemed to assess this for a moment with the solemn consideration of someone taking a piece of information seriously. Then she said, "Can we call my Baba?" He handed her his phone. She called. Nora answered before the first ring had finished. The subsequent 20 minutes contained the kind of exchange that happens when a 71-year-old woman who has been doing very controlled driving through a very controlled assessment of a terrifying situation receives confirmation that her grandchild is safe. The relief does not come out dramatically. It comes out in the voice in the specific way the voice changes when the thing you were holding against gets lifted and you have to redistribute all the energy that was braced against it. Rex pulled up to the service road 4 minutes after Nora did. He stepped off his bike and looked at the storage building and the hasp on the ground, and Blaze standing next to a very composed 11-year-old girl, and he made a single small nod that contained about 40 different things compressed into one controlled gesture. Then he looked at Nora, who was holding Willa with both arms, and her eyes closed, and he made a different expression, one that was harder to categorize. It had to do with Colt Ryder and his own mother, and a motorcycle going past a street corner at the right moment, and a woman in a dark green cardigan who had refused to move and who was now standing in the October evening light with her arms around her granddaughter and not letting go. Wade Slater pulled up in his patrol car 7 minutes later, having received a call from the school office about a missing student. He stepped out and saw Rex Dalton standing beside his motorcycle and Nora Briggs holding her granddaughter, and Blaze Carver leaning against the wall of the storage building, and the hasp on the ground and the open door. Slater looked at the scene for a moment. His expression moved through several stages. Assessment, recognition, something that might have been calculation, the specific kind that comes when a person realizes they are being watching. Rex looked back at him steadily. He had his phone in his hand. He had been recording since Slater's patrol car turned onto the service road. Slater could see this. Rex did not try to conceal it. "Deputy," Nora said, her voice very controlled and very clear in the evening air. "I need to make a formal report. My granddaughter was locked in this storage building by Trent Keller at approximately 3:45 this afternoon. I would like the incident documented, the building examined for evidence, and a response generated in writing with a timestamp." Slater looked from her to Rex to the building. He looked at Rex's phone. He looked at the expression on Rex's face, which had no anger in it and no threat. Just the complete specific attention of a man who is watching everything and recording all of it, and who will remember all of it regardless of what happens to the recording. Slater got his notepad out. It was a small thing, a notepad, an official beginning a pen, moving across paper with a timestamp at the top. But it was also the first time in 2 months that a person with institutional authority in Millhaven had put a pen to paper in Sadie and Willa's direction with the intention of writing something that would become part of a record. Nora watched him write. She held Willa against her side with one arm. She was already thinking past this moment to the next thing. What Flynn could do with a time-stamped report connecting Trent Keller to a locked 11-year-old. What the video Rex was taking would establish about Slater's awareness of the incident. She was not finished thinking. She was never finished until the thing was finished. She thought the third column is getting longer. She thought we are just getting started. That night, Nora sat at the kitchen table after the girls were in bed and called Rex. He answered on the second ring. "Slater recorded it," she said. "He put it on paper. That means there is a timestamp connecting Trent Keller to a locked minor in a school building. That is a record." "It is," Rex said. "Will not be enough by itself." "No, but it is a thread, and threads connect to other threads." She paused. "Did you get anything useful from the video?" "I sent it to Flynn tonight. She says it shows Slater responding to the scene and taking the report, which establishes his awareness of the incident. If he subsequently misfiled it or failed to act on it, that is another obstruction count to add to the pattern she is building." Nora was quiet for a moment, writing on her legal pad. "I want Sadie to hear how this works," she said. "I want her to understand that the system can be made to work even when it does not want to. She needs to see that it is possible." Rex thought about that. About Colt Ryder, who had died believing it could not. About the difference between the two, not in the situation exactly, because the situations had their own distinctions, but in who was around them when the situation got hard. That was the thing. The situation was never the whole story. Who stood beside you in the situation was also part of it. "Tell her about the thread thing," he said, "about how they connect." "I will," Nora said. Another pause. The kitchen was quiet. Through the wall, the low sound of the house settling in the cold, the particular language of old houses in Montana winters. "Your friend," Nora said carefully. "The one in Bozeman. You said you were going to reach out." "I called him today," Rex said. "He will talk. He has been wanting to talk for years. He just needed to know someone was ready to use it." Nora let out a slow breath. "When?" "He can come to Billings next week. I will tell Flynn." "All right," Nora said. She looked out the kitchen window at the dark yard, at the aspens that were mostly bare, now the gold leaves mostly down. The mountains invisible in the dark. Rex. Yeah. What you said about hope, that it costs something to carry it. She paused. Your mother sounds like she was formidable. He was quiet for a moment. She was, he said. She was the kind of woman who would have gotten along with you. Nora made a sound that was almost a laugh. I will take that. She put down her pen and looked at the legal pad. The third column had 14 items in it now. 7 of them had been crossed off. She drew a line under the last open item and looked at the 7 that remained and thought about the order in which they needed to happen. She turned off the kitchen light. The house was quiet. The mountains were out there in the dark, the same as they had always been. Somewhere in Billings, Andrea Flynn was building a case that had been 15 years in the making. In a file cabinet at Clearwater Medical were records that told the truth that had been buried. The truth has its own kind of momentum. It had been building for 10 days. It was not done building, but the water was getting close to boiling. What Nora did not know on that Thursday night in her quiet kitchen was that Sadie was not asleep. Sadie was sitting at her desk in the dark with her phone in her hands and a recording app open that she had downloaded 3 days ago. She had been thinking about what her grandmother had said about documentation and threads and the way things connected. She had been thinking about the particular frustration of having experienced something that nobody would believe or act on without proof, and the question of what proof looked like in the specific context she was dealing with. She had an idea. Trent Keller liked to talk. He liked to perform. He liked an audience, even a small one. And there were places in the school day bathroom corridors, the end of the lunch line, the dead zone behind the gym before 5th period, where he talked without thinking much about who was listening, because the people in those spaces were always the same people, his people, and he had never had reason to consider otherwise. Sadie had spent 2 months learning his patterns, the way you learn the patterns of something you are trying to avoid. She knew where he was before 5th period. She knew who was with him. She knew that he talked about his father and his father's connections with the casual ownership of someone who has been told all his life that these connections are his to inherit and deploy. The next day she was in the dead zone behind the gym before 5th period, close to the corner where the hallway turned, with her phone in her jacket pocket and the recording app running. She did not have to wait long. Trent's voice came around the corner with 2 of his friends. He was talking about the storage building incident with the comfortable amusement of someone recounting a successful prank. He used the word prank himself. He said, "My dad already handled the report, told Slater to bury it like the last time. He said that old lady can file whatever she wants. The judge decides what matters in this county, and right now, that is still us." He said this with the specific ease of someone who has never had to consider that the walls around him might not be permanent. Sadie's hand was not shaking. She held the phone steady in her pocket, and she breathed, and she listened, and she did not move until the voices had passed. Then she went to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall and looked at the recording on her phone with her heart going very fast and her breath coming in controlled counts, the way her grandmother had taught her to breathe when she was afraid. She listened to 30 seconds of it. Clear, audible. Trent's voice naming Slater, naming his father, naming the storage building incident, naming the instruction to bury the report. She uploaded it to a private cloud account she had created with an email address that had no connection to her name. She sent a copy to her grandmother's email. She sent a copy to the number her grandmother had given her for emergencies only. Then she went to 5th period. She did not tell anyone what she had done until that evening. She showed Nora the recording at the kitchen table after dinner quietly while Willa was in the other room. Nora listened to it once. Then she listened to it again. She set the phone down on the table carefully. She looked at her granddaughter for a long moment. "You did this on your own," she said. "I thought about what you said," Sadie said. "About documentation, about threads connecting." Nora was quiet for a moment. "It was risky," she said. "If he had found the phone—" "I know," Sadie said, "but he did not." Another pause. Nora looked at the phone on the table, at the recording, at her 14-year-old granddaughter with the green eyes and the steady hands and the specific particular courage of someone who has been afraid long enough to understand that fear is not the last word. "I'm going to send this to Flynn tonight," Nora said. Sadie nodded. "I figured. And I want to talk to you tomorrow about what we do if Trent figures out where it came from. I want you to understand the next steps." "Okay." Nora looked at her granddaughter one more time. Then she said, "Your mother would have done exactly this." Sadie absorbed that for a moment. She looked at the table. Then she looked up. "Is that good or bad?" "It is exactly what it is," Nora said, "which is very good." Flynn received the recording at 10:40 that night and called Nora back at 11:15. Her voice had the quality of controlled professional excitement, the voice of someone who has just received the thing they needed at the moment they needed it. This is Trent Keller's voice, stating explicitly that Wade Slater was instructed to suppress the storage building report at Harlan Keller's direction, and referencing a prior incident handled the same way. That prior incident, combined with what Ruth gave you about the 2022 medical case, establishes a pattern of instruction and compliance. She paused. "This accelerates things considerably." "How soon can you file?" Nora asked. "I am filing the expanded motion Monday," Flynn said. "I am including the recording, the incident report timeline, Gunner's public records documentation, and Ruth's account as a formal witness statement. When McCready comes down next week, his testimony goes into the supplementary filing." Another pause. "Nora, your granddaughter did something exceptional." "She did," Nora said. She hung up and sat with that for a moment. Then she turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark for a moment with her hands on the counter and thought about the list on the legal pad. She did not get up to check it. She knew what was on it. 6 items remaining in the third column. Flynn's filing would handle 3 of them. McCready would handle 1 more. 2 left? Both of them harder than the others. Both of them requiring something she did not fully control. But that was all right. She had not controlled everything at the beginning either. She had started with what she had and found more as she needed it. That was how it always worked. You could not see the whole road from the beginning. You just had to trust that the road was there and keep moving. Phil McCready came down from Bozeman the following Tuesday. He was in his late 60s, compact and gray, with the slightly compressed quality of a man who has been carrying something for a long time, and whose posture has gradually incorporated the weight of it. He sat in Flynn's conference room with his hands folded, and he told the story of the Ryder trial with the specific unburdened quality of someone who has been waiting 15 years for someone to sit across from him and be ready to hear it. He had been the clerk of court. He had personally logged evidence. He had watched the chain of custody documentation altered between the filing date and the court date. He had been visited afterward by a man he did not recognize, who had suggested without specifics that his continued employment depended on his continued silence. He had said nothing for 15 years, not because he was without conscience, because he had been a frightened man in a small place controlled by a powerful system, and because the system had made clear in every way available to it that speaking would cost him more than silence. He had spent 15 years with Colt Ryder's name in his head, and the knowledge of what he had not done about it, and the question of whether in different circumstances he might have been different. He said everything now. Flynn filed the preliminary motion on Thursday. It cited systemic corruption in the Millhaven County Sheriff's Department named Wade Slater, specifically in connection with obstruction of evidence in a 2022 child endangerment case, and in the improper handling of the Briggs report, contained a supplementary affidavit from Phil McCready regarding the 2009 Ryder trial, and referenced the audio recording obtained by Sadie Briggs as corroborating evidence of a continuing pattern. By Friday morning, the motion had been picked up by the Billings Gazette. By Friday afternoon, it had been picked up by the Associated Press. By Friday evening, the name Harlan Keller was appearing on news aggregators alongside words like judicial misconduct and corruption investigation and state bar review. Harlan Keller read the AP story at 11 o'clock on a Friday morning in his office and felt for the first time in 19 years the specific chill of a floor he had believed to be solid beginning to shift under his feet. He made 3 phone calls in rapid succession, the first to his personal attorney, the second to Wade Slater, who did not answer, which was itself a signal of a kind he had not received before, the third to a man in the county commissioner's office who also did not answer, which was a louder signal. He sat for a long time after, in the particular quiet of a powerful man who has just recognized the shape of something he had thought was safely behind him. In Millhaven on Clearwater Road, Wade Slater pulled off the highway into the gravel lot of a diner called the Wagon Wheel and sat in his car with the engine off for a long time. He looked at his phone. He looked at the Billings Gazette app at his name in the 4th paragraph of the story. He had spent 12 years building something. It was smaller than Keller's arrangement. But it had been his, and it had been comfortable, and he had told himself for 12 years that comfortable was close enough to right. He picked up his phone. He did not call Keller. He called Andrea Flynn's office and left a message that said he would like to speak with her at her earliest convenience, that he had documentation he believed would be relevant to her current proceedings, and that he was prepared to cooperate fully. He sat in the gravel lot until it got dark. Then he drove home. In Millhaven that same Friday afternoon, Trent Keller walked into Jefferson Middle School and was met at the door by Principal Doris Weaver. She had in her hand a letter from the district superintendent's office. She read it to him in the hallway briefly, with the expression of a woman who has been in a situation where she made the wrong choice before and is not going to make it again. The letter suspended Trent, pending a formal disciplinary hearing on 3 counts: the September video, the incidents documented by Sadie, and the storage building incident, which now had an official police report, timestamp, a corroborating audio recording, and the attention of a state-level attorney. Trent looked at Weaver with the expression of a person encountering a consequence for the first time. "This is because of her grandmother," he said. Weaver looked at him. She had spent 11 years making her career smaller to fit inside the space that Harlan Keller defined. She had watched girls like Sadie Briggs learn not to expect anything from adults in authority, because the adults in authority had taught them exactly that. She thought about those 11 years. She thought about the girl at the podium she would soon watch stand up in front of the whole school and speak. She thought about what it meant that the girl had to do that at all. "It is because of what you did," she said. She said it with the directness of someone who has been practicing the sentence for a while and is now saying it to the right person in the right room. Trent had no answer for that. He walked out. Doris watched him go. Then she went back to her office and called Nora Briggs and told her what had happened and said she was sorry it had taken this long. Nora said she accepted the apology and they would figure out what came next together. Doris hung up and sat at her desk and thought about the 11 years and what she was going to do differently with whatever years came after. Nora told Sadie about the suspension that evening at the kitchen table over the venison stew that had been in the slow cooker all day. Willa was there eating steadily, processing through the medium of food, as was her custom. Sadie sat across from her grandmother and listened to the whole account: Flynn's motion, McCready's affidavit, Slater's cooperation call, Trent's suspension, and she was quiet the whole time Nora spoke. When Nora was done, Sadie was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "It worked." "It is not over," Nora said. "There are legal processes. It takes time." "But it is working," Sadie said. "The thing you have been building, it is actually working." Nora looked at her granddaughter, at the green, watchful eyes that had spent 2 months not expecting help and were now doing something different, something that was careful, still because she was a careful girl, but that had in it the beginning of a recalibration, the beginning of believing that the world could be made to respond if you pushed hard enough on the right places with the right tools. "Yes," Nora said, "it is working." Willa pointed her spoon at the center of the table. "More stew," she said. They had more stew. The evening after, Sadie showed Nora the recording after Flynn's call after the kitchen settled into its ordinary nighttime quiet. Nora sat at the table for a while longer than usual. She was thinking about the specific shape of what her granddaughter had done. Not just the act of it, which required its own kind of courage, the courage of going back to the place where you have been hurt and staying long enough to gather what you need, but the thinking that had preceded it. Sadie had listened to what Nora said about documentation and threads and had absorbed it and applied it with the independent intelligence of someone who does not wait to be told what the next step is, but reasons it out herself. Carol had been like that too, the kind of person who heard a principle and immediately began extrapolating its applications. Nora opened the kitchen drawer and looked at the things inside. The crock-pot recipe in Carol's handwriting, the ink slightly faded on the card, the specific letter forms of her daughter's hand. The last birthday card Carol had sent her, which arrived 3 weeks before the cardiac event, and which said nothing remarkable. Just the ordinary words people say to their mothers on birthdays, because the ordinary words are the ones that accumulate over a lifetime into something that weighs more than the remarkable ones. She closed the drawer. She thought about what it meant to parent in the presence of loss, to raise children who carry in the fact of their existence the evidence of someone who is no longer there. Sadie and Willa carried Carol the way the aspens carried the last light of October, not stored inside, but visible in them, present in the specific gold of them when conditions were right. She thought about the note that had said, "No mom, no dad, nobody coming for you." She thought about the person who had written it and what they had been trying to accomplish, which was to make Sadie feel the specific, unbearable weight of being alone in the world. She thought about how completely wrong that note was, not just as a cruelty, but as a factual matter. It had been wrong from the moment it was written, wrong in every direction it reached. Sadie had a grandmother who had fought for her with everything she had. She had a sister who would walk into trouble for her without hesitating. She had improbably and permanently the Iron Wolves MC. She had Andrea Flynn in Billings. She had Phil McCready, who had carried a name for 15 years and was finally ready to say what it meant. Nobody coming for you. The note had been wrong about every word. Nora folded her hands on the table and looked at the kitchen, at the familiar arrangement of ordinary things that had been in the same places for 20 years. The same hooks for coats by the back door. The same crack in the upper corner of the cabinet that she had been meaning to have fixed and had never gotten around to. The same view from the window of the aspens and the mountains. She thought, this is enough. This is more than enough. This is the whole thing. Outside the window of the Briggs house, the aspens were bare and the mountains were fully white, and the October dark had the particular quality it has in Montana, vast and cold, and full of the kind of silence that is not empty, but is simply very, very old. The town of Millhaven sat in that dark, the way it always had its flaws and its grace, both equally present, equally real. In the rented house on Creek Road, Rex Dalton was eating beans from a can and reading the Billings Gazette on his phone. He read Flynn's quote twice. He read McCready's name in the story and let himself feel that for a moment. He thought about Colt Ryder and what it would have meant to Colt to see his name in a story about the case being reopened, about the evidence being scrutinized, about the judge who had sentenced him facing questions he had never been made to face before. He sat with that for a while. Then he put the phone down and looked at the ceiling of the rented room and breathed. It was not enough to undo what had been done to Colt. Nothing was ever going to be enough for that. That was the brutal arithmetic of justice. It could not restore what had been taken. It could only change what came next. What came next mattered. What came next for Sadie mattered. What came next for Willa, who had spent 90 minutes in a maintenance shed and come out mad instead of broken, mattered considerably. He picked up his phone and texted Gunner, motion filed. AP picked it up. Gunner replied 4 minutes later with a single word, good. Then after a pause, a second text Flynn sent anything about McCready. Rex typed back full cooperation, everything. A long pause. Then Colt would have liked this. Rex stared at that for a moment. He thought yes, he would have. He put the phone down. He sat in the quiet of the rented room in Millhaven, Montana in the last week of October, and he let himself feel the specific gravity of a thing that has been waiting a very long time to become something other than what it was. There was one more thing that needed to happen, and it happened on a Thursday morning in the first week of November, when Nora was at the kitchen table with her coffee and her legal pad, and the phone rang, and it was Rex. "Keller is coming to the house," he said, "this afternoon." Nora set down her mug. "What do you mean he is coming to the house?" "He is coming personally, to make an offer." Rex's voice was level, the same quality of level it had been the whole time. "His attorney called Flynn's office this morning. Keller wants to negotiate directly outside of the legal proceedings. He wants to offer you a settlement, a financial arrangement, in exchange for a withdrawal of the supplementary motion that names him specifically in the Ryder case." Nora was very still. "He wants to buy his way out." "He wants to try," Rex said. She thought for a moment. "You said he is coming to the house. How does he know to come here?" "He has known where you live for years. He is a judge, was a judge. He could look up any address in the county whenever he wanted." She looked out the kitchen window at the yard, the aspens, the mountains, the ordinary Thursday morning. "Are you telling me this so I can prepare to talk to him?" "I am telling you this," Rex said carefully, "because I am going to be there." Nora considered that. "Will that make things worse?" "If there is documentation of his arrival and his offer," Rex said, "it actually makes the legal case better." "Flynn agrees. She was on the phone with me this morning before I called you." Another pause. "You have already spoken to Flynn?" "This morning," Rex said. "She says whatever he offers constitutes attempted interference with an ongoing legal proceeding if he is naming the motion specifically, which he will be." She thought about that, about the network of it, the threads connecting, the way things had been built over 6 weeks from a kitchen table and a legal pad and a phone call and a motorcycle that had stopped on a corner because the man riding it was the kind of man who stopped. "All right," she said. "Come at 2. He will come at 3 if I know his type." Rex showed up at 1:50 with Gunner. Blaze came 20 minutes later, having been on Creek Road and having received a text from Gunner that simply said, "House noon," and having understood what that meant. The three of them sat in Nora's kitchen drinking the coffee she made and not talking much, which was comfortable in the way that silences are comfortable between people who have been through something together and do not need to perform normalcy for each other. At 3:15, Harlan Keller knocked on the front door of the house on River Road. He was in his good coat and his good shoes, the clothes of a man who knows how to present authority, even when its institutional backing has been temporarily removed. He was 61 years old, gray at the temples, with the square jaw his son had inherited, and the particular way of filling a doorway that comes from decades of being the largest presence in every room he entered. Nora opened the door. She was in her dark green cardigan. She looked at him. "Mr. Keller," she said. She did not say judge. He looked at her. His eyes went past her briefly into the kitchen, and he saw Rex and Gunner, and whatever adjustment he made to his expression was quick and practiced, but was still visible to someone who was watching for it. Nora was watching for it. "Mrs. Briggs," he said, "I appreciate you allowing me to come." "I did not invite you," she said. "I was informed you were coming. That is a different thing." She stepped back from the door. "Come in." He came in. He did not remove his coat. He stood in the kitchen with Nora at the table and Rex and Gunner against the far wall, and he had the specific quality of a man who is accustomed to controlling rooms and who is currently in one he does not control and is managing that fact with the effort it requires, the effort that is visible to anyone who knows what controlled effort looks like. "I would like to speak with you privately," he said. "These men have been helping me with a legal matter that intersects with the matter you are here to discuss," Nora said. "They stay." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down." He sat. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at her across the laminate surface of the kitchen table in the house on River Road where two granddaughters would be home from school in less than an hour. "I would like to propose a way to resolve this," he said, "that is better for everyone involved." "Tell me what you are proposing," Nora said. He proposed a number. A significant number. The kind of number that said to a woman living on a fixed income in a house with a sagging porch and a furnace that complained in the cold was designed to create the specific internal pressure of "this could change everything." He said it with the practiced steadiness of a man who had made similar propositions before and knew which expressions to watch for. He watched Nora's face. Nora looked at him for a moment. She looked at the hands folded on her table. She looked at the square jaw and the gray temples and the 19 years of collected power that had believed itself to be permanent because nothing had challenged it. "Mr. Keller," she said, "you put a man in prison for something he did not do, and he died there. You arranged for the person who hurt a child to face no consequence, and that arrangement meant that child was never protected. And you made sure that when my granddaughter started being hurt, the systems that should have helped her were already too comfortable with looking away to see her clearly." She stopped. She let that sit in the kitchen air. "The number you have named is a large number," she said. "It would do things for this family. I will not pretend otherwise because pretending otherwise would be disrespectful to both of us." She looked at him steadily. "But money is not what I came for. What I came for was for my granddaughter to walk down Birchwood Street without dreading it. We have that now. What I am after next is the record. The public record of what you did and how it worked and who it hurt. Money does not change the record. Accepting money in exchange for silence changes the record in exactly the wrong direction." Keller's jaw tightened slightly. "You understand," he said, "that these legal proceedings will be very long and very costly, and there is no certainty about the outcome." "I understand," Nora said. "I have been a nurse for 30 years. I know a great deal about things that are long and costly and uncertain." She paused. "I also know the difference between a process that might not succeed and one that is worth attempting." He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at Rex and Gunnar. He looked back at Nora with the expression of a man who has run through his remaining options and is genuinely, for perhaps the first time in many years, asking rather than strategizing. "What do you actually want?" he said. Nora thought about it, not as a rhetorical exercise, as a real question deserving a real answer. "I want the review of the Ryder case completed," she said. "I want it public. I want it to say clearly what happened and who was responsible. I want the child welfare review of your tenure to be thorough and documented. And I want Colt Ryder's name cleared publicly in writing so that the people who cared about him have something to show for what he went through." She paused. "I do not want money. I want the truth on the record. That is the only thing I have ever wanted." Keller was quiet for a long time. He was looking at the table. He was doing the calculation that people do when they realize that the thing they have been trying to avoid has already arrived, and the question is no longer whether to face it, but how. "That would require my cooperation," he said quietly. "Yes," Nora said, "it would." He looked up at her. There was something different in his expression now. Not contrition, because this was not a man built for contrition, but something in the vicinity of recognition. The recognition of someone who has perhaps for the first time been in the presence of a person who simply will not be moved and has accepted that this is true, and that acceptance is its own kind of conclusion. "I will speak with my attorney," he said. He got up from the table. He straightened his coat. He walked to the front door and opened it himself because Nora did not get up to see him out. He paused in the doorway. He looked back at her. "Your granddaughter's statement," he said. "At the school meeting last week. I watched it online." A pause. "She has your quality." Nora looked at him. "She has her mother's," she said. He left. The door closed. The three of them sat in the kitchen in the quiet for a moment. Gunnar exhaled slowly. Blaze, who had been standing near the back door and had been very still for the past 20 minutes, let out a breath that he appeared to have been holding for some time. Rex looked at Nora. "You turned down a very large number," he said. "Yes," she said. "You are sure about that?" "I am sure," she said. He looked at her for a moment with that expression she had come to know, the one without performance in it, the one that contained simply what it contained. Colt would have. He stopped, started again. He always said the record was the thing, that nobody could take back what was written down, that the rest could be argued, but a record was a record. His voice had something in it that was not common for his voice. He would have wanted to hear that, what you said about his name. Nora looked at her hands on the table. "Then we will make sure it is written down," she said. A week later, Harlan Keller's attorney contacted Andrea Flynn and indicated that Keller was prepared to cooperate with the state attorney general's review of the Ryder case in exchange for a negotiated arrangement on the remaining charges. Flynn called Nora that evening and read her the opening paragraph of the cooperation agreement, which contained at its specific and formal heart the acknowledgement that the 2009 conviction of Colt Ryder had been obtained through the fraudulent manipulation of evidence and that the presiding judge had participated in that manipulation. The record, written down. Nora held the phone and listened to Flynn read the paragraph a second time because she wanted to hear it twice. Then she said, "Thank you, Andrea." She used the first name, which she had not done before. Flynn said, "Thank you, Nora." She used it back. Two women who had come at a hard thing from different angles and had found their way to the same place. After she hung up, she sat at the kitchen table for a while. Sadie was at debate practice. Willa was at her friend Penny Mabel's house 3 blocks over. The house was quiet in the good way. She pulled open the kitchen drawer and found the card from Rex. She looked at the single sentence and the initial. She thought about Phil McCready, who had carried something for 15 years and had finally been allowed to put it down. She thought about what relief felt like, the specific quality of a weight removed, whether it ever fully disappeared or whether you simply grew accustomed enough to its absence to understand it as normal. She thought about her daughter, about Carol, who had the green eyes and the steady voice and the stubborn chin that Willa had inherited. She thought about what Carol would have done with this situation, which would have been loud and fast and certain, and what Nora had done with it, which had been patient and methodical and certain in a different register, different tools, different roads, the same place. She put the card back in the drawer. She got up and went to the refrigerator and thought about what was in it and thought venison stew. Why not? It was the thing that worked. She put the pot on and turned on the heat and stood at the stove while the first smells of garlic and rosemary began to fill the kitchen. There was one more thing. The community meeting. Weaver had organized it for the last day of October. Parents and teachers and students, a formal presentation of the new bullying policy she had been building since all of this started. She had invited Nora to speak, and Nora had told Rex about it the previous week on the phone in the evening and had said, "I would like you to come." He had said, "You sure about that?" She had said, "I am sure. I want people to see who helped. I want it to be on the record that the Iron Wolves MC came through for 2 girls in this town, and that the people who were supposed to do that had to be pushed." He had said, "Gunnar and Blaze will want to come." She had said, "Bring who you want, within reason." He had said, "Define within reason." She had said, "No more than 40. He had said, in what was the closest she had yet heard to something like humor from him, "That is very generous. We will see who is free." The meeting was at 7 o'clock in the Jefferson Middle School gymnasium. By 6:45, the parking lot was fuller than it had been for any school event in recent memory. Parents who had not come to parent nights in 3 years were there. Teachers who had been going home immediately after school were there. The superintendent had driven down from the district office. The reporter from the Millhaven Valley Gazette was there with a notebook, which meant the evening's events would be part of whatever public record the Valley was building about this period in its own history. At 6:50, the sound came from Clearwater Road. 34 motorcycles. Rex had apparently decided that 34 was within reason. An exact count that Blaze would tell Nora later had required 3 phone calls to other chapters and 1 to a club 2 towns over who had their own relationship with Millhaven's history. They came up Main Street and turned onto Clearwater Road and parked in 2 rows along the east side of the school parking lot, and the men who got off them were not young, and they were not soft, and they had in common, all 34 of them, the particular quality of people who have made choices about what they will and will not do when something wrong is happening in their sight line, and who have chosen the same thing. Nobody had invited them. That was the point. They had come on their own because they had decided to. That distinction mattered. Nora was standing at the gym doors when Rex walked up. He had his jacket and his boots, and the gray-black hair, and the expression that had no performance in it. 34, she said. 34, he confirmed. She looked at the 2 rows of bikes in the parking lot, at the men standing quietly in the November cold, and she said, "Thank you." Rex looked at her, not at the bikes, at her. "You built this," he said. "We built it," she said. He dipped his chin. Acknowledgement. They went inside. The gymnasium was warm and full of the particular noise of a community gathering. The bleachers were mostly full. The folding chairs on the floor were filling. Rex and his men took the back wall. This was not theater. It was simply where certain people stand who have learned that the best position is the one with the widest view. They did not sit. They were not uncomfortable. They were just there along the wall, quiet, present the way a thing can be present without demanding attention and still be felt by everyone in the room. Weaver opened the meeting. She gave a formal statement about the school's new policies, the expanded reporting channels, the third-party oversight committee she was establishing. She was clear and specific and did not hedge. She stood differently than she had in their first meeting. The cover she had been operating under had shifted, and the person underneath it was more present than she had been. The difficult, necessary conversation happened. Parents spoke, teachers spoke. The community did the slow, imperfect work of acknowledging that it had been looking the other way and trying to understand what looking back required of it. Then Weaver called Sadie up. Sadie was 14 years old and had agreed to this the day before when Nora had asked her, and she had spent 24 hours being quietly terrified about it and had done it anyway, which was the whole job as Nora had defined it. She walked to the podium in her dark jeans and her plain blue sweater, not the hoodie, and she stood up straight in front of 200 people, and she looked at the microphone for a moment and then looked up at the room. She did not have notes. "My name is Sadie Briggs," she said. "I am in 8th grade here. I have been going to this school since 5th grade, and for the first 2 months of this year, I dreaded coming because there were people here who made sure every day was something I had to survive rather than something I could actually live." The gymnasium was very quiet. "I did not tell my grandmother for a long time because I did not want to worry her, and I did not tell the school because I had learned that telling the school was not going to do anything. Not because the teachers were bad people, but because some things in some places get too comfortable, and comfortable things do not change unless something makes them uncomfortable." She looked up at the back of the room, at the row of men along the wall, 34 of them quiet in the gymnasium light. "Something made them uncomfortable," she said. "A group of people who had no particular reason to stop on that street and who stopped anyway, and my grandmother who has had a reason every day of her life." She looked back at the room. "I am not going to stand here and tell you it is all fine now because it is not fully fine yet. But I walked down Birchwood Street this week and nothing happened. And that matters, because a month ago I could not do that." She stopped. "I think that is what change looks like. Not always big, usually just smaller things that used to be big, until they are not." She stepped back from the podium. The gymnasium was still for a moment. Then the applause started, and it was not polite. It was real. It had in it the specific quality of a room full of people who have been wanting to do something for a while and have just been given permission. Nora was at the edge of the gym floor. She watched her granddaughter walk back from the podium. She did not cry because she had done her crying in private as was her custom, but she felt something in her chest That was the specific and not easily nameable feeling of watching someone you love discover that they are more than what the worst thing that happened to them tried to make them. Sadie came and stood beside her. She was trembling slightly, the aftermath of the adrenaline. Nora put her arm around her granddaughter's shoulders, said nothing, just held on. Willa appeared from somewhere in the crowd and wedged herself between them with the complete lack of self-consciousness of someone who goes where they are needed without waiting to be invited. And the three of them stood together in the warm gymnasium, while around them the meeting went on and the community did its careful, imperfect work. After the meeting in the parking lot in the cold, 34 motorcycles still there in their 2 rows, some engines running, some not. The men standing around them with the patience of people who have been in worse places in worse weather and who are in no particular hurry. Rex was leaning against his bike with his helmet in his hand. When Nora walked over, he straightened. Gunnar was a few feet away. Blaze was talking to someone from another chapter with the animated quality of a person discovering shared acquaintance. Nora stopped in front of Rex. She put out her hand. He looked at it for a moment. He looked at her. Then he shifted the helmet to his other hand and shook. His hand was large and scarred and warm, and hers was 71 years old and had held more than it should have ever had to hold, and they shook hands the way people do when something important has passed between them, and the gesture carries more than a greeting, more than courtesy, the acknowledgement of something real. Colt would have liked this, Rex said. Nora looked at him. She had heard about Colt now, piece by piece, the whole arc of it, and she understood something of what it had meant and what it still meant and what it always would mean. "Tell me about him sometime," she said. "He was the best man I have known," Rex said simply. "Funnier than me, better looking, considerably more patient." "That last one could not have been difficult," Nora said. Rex's face did something. Small, taking only a moment. The first real smile she had seen from him since the corner of Birchwood and Maple, without performance, without calculation, just his. "My mother would have liked you," he said. "Your mother sounds like she was exceptional," Nora said. "She was 74 years old and she fixed her own gutters," Rex said. "That is all I need to say about it." Nora laughed. A real laugh, unexpected, the kind that comes without being invited, and it felt in the cold November air of the Jefferson Middle School parking lot exactly as good as it sounds. The first real laugh in a significant number of weeks. Willa appeared at Nora's side as she always eventually appeared. She looked up at Rex with the frank, assessing look of an 11-year-old who forms her own opinions. "You organized all these guys?" Willa said. "Not a question." "More or less? How many people do you actually know?" Rex thought about it. "More than is entirely comfortable," he said. Willa nodded with great seriousness. "That seems useful," she said. Rex looked at Nora over Willa's head. Nora made the expression of a grandmother who has spent 11 years with this child. Sadie had come up more slowly. She stopped beside her grandmother and looked at Rex, and Rex looked at her. "That was brave," he said, "what you did in there." Sadie looked at her hands for a moment, then at him. "My grandmother says courage is just being scared and doing it anyway." Rex looked at Nora. "Your grandmother is right. She usually is," Sadie said. Then, with the slight careful formality of someone who means it exactly as much as the words suggest, "Thank you for stopping. On Maple Street. You did not have to." Rex was quiet for a moment. He looked at this 14-year-old girl in the blue sweater, this daughter of a woman who had died too young, this granddaughter of a woman who did not give up, and he thought about stopping, which was what he had done, which was simply the only thing he knew how to do when something wrong was happening in his sight line. "Yes, I did," he said. Sadie nodded slowly, the way she nodded when she was filing something away in the place she kept things that mattered. The motorcycles started pulling out of the lot in ones and twos, and then in a group, the engines warming up and filling the November night with that specific sound that gets into the chest and stays. Rex put on his helmet. He started his engine. He looked at Nora one more time. She held up her hand. Not a wave exactly, something more like an acknowledgement. the gesture of one person to another who has been in the same difficult place and come through the same difficult side. Rex nodded once. He pulled out of the lot. The sound of 34 motorcycles going down Clearwater Road carried for a long time in the cold air, bouncing off the mountain faces, echoing against the dark, and the people still in the parking lot stood and listened to it without quite meaning to. That particular sound, the sound of iron and purpose, moving away from a place where something had changed. And then the sound faded, and the night was quiet, and Millhaven was still there, ordinary and flawed and necessary the way places always are. The formal proceedings took months as Flynn had predicted. Harlan Keller resigned from the bench in mid-November, citing personal reasons in the language of men who have been told exactly what is coming and have made the calculation that voluntary departure leaves more control than being removed. The state bar investigation remained ongoing, and what Flynn told Nora likely result in disbarment and a referral for criminal prosecution on the Ryder matter. The case was being reviewed by the State Attorney General's office 15 years late, which was not justice in its ideal form, but was acknowledgement, and acknowledgement was something real. It was a record. Wade Slater resigned from the Sheriff's Department in the same week. The cooperation agreement Flynn had negotiated resulted in a misdemeanor plea on 2 counts. He moved to his wife's family in Idaho. Nobody in Millhaven missed him exactly, but his absence required the county to reckon with what had been happening under his tenure, and that reckoning, public and uncomfortable and slow, was its own form of accountability. Trent Keller was formally expelled from Jefferson Middle School in December following the completion of the disciplinary hearing. He was enrolled in a private school outside Bozeman, which meant the consequence he faced was of the gentler variety available to boys whose families still had resources, even diminished ones. It was not a perfect outcome. Nora had made her peace with imperfection a long time ago. She was in the business of doing what was possible, not what was ideal. The possible was not nothing. The possible was often quite a lot. Sadie joined the school's debate team in November. She had wanted to do it since 6th grade and had not, for reasons she now understood clearly, and did not intend to let govern her future. She was, as it turned out, very good. She had the mind for it and the voice for it. She placed second in the district championship in January, her first year competing, and she received this news with the specific combination of pride and irritation that belongs to someone who came close and intends to close the gap. Willa took up basketball with the same headlong energy she brought to everything. She played aggressively and apologized for elbows and knocked things over and was enormously happy. Nora went to every game. She kept the legal pad. The 3rd column was complete. She crossed off the last item in January when the county commissioner formally announced that a task force would review the Millhaven County Sheriff's Department's handling of minor welfare cases from 2019 onward. She tore the page off the pad. She folded it twice and put it in the kitchen drawer with the crockpot recipe and Carol's last birthday card, and the small things she kept because they mattered, and she did not want to lose them. In February, she received a card in the mail with no return address. Montana postmark. Inside, one sentence in plain handwriting. Hope the girls are doing well. Under the sentence, a signature R. She put the card with the other things in the kitchen drawer. She wrote back. She sent the letter to the Iron Wolves MC Clubhouse, which was the only address she had, and she did not know if it would reach him, but she sent it anyway because that was the kind of woman she was, the kind who sends the letter even when delivery is uncertain, because the act of sending is its own thing, separate from the arrival. In the letter, she said the girls were doing well. She said Sadie had placed second in the district debate championship, which was exceptional for a first-year competitor, and that Sadie was responding to this with the specific combination of pride and irritation that meant she intended to place first next year. She said Willa had scored 14 points in a game 2 weeks ago and had immediately fallen and scraped her knee leaving the court and had barely noticed. She said the aspens along the river road had started budding just barely, the first of the tentative new green that comes in March in Montana and means the worst of the winter is past. She said your mother was right, by the way, about hope. It costs something to carry, but the carrying is still better than the not carrying. I believe that more now than I did before all of this started, and I started believing it quite strongly. She said you were the right person to stop on that corner. She said thank you for staying. She folded the letter and sealed it and drove it to the post office on a Tuesday morning in early March, with the light coming over the Beartooths, the way it comes in early spring, low and gold, and specific, the kind of light that makes everything it touches look exactly like what it is. She put the letter in the slot. She stood for a moment in the post office parking lot with her keys in her hand and the mountain light on her face. She thought about the corner of Birchwood and Maple, which was just a corner. She thought about the legal pad and its 3 columns, and the work that had been done, and the work that was still being done by people in offices and courtrooms, the slow, specific labor of institutions being held to account. She thought about Sadie at the podium. She thought about Willa counting maintenance equipment in a locked shed and coming out mad instead of broken. She thought about Carol, who had those eyes, who was not here, and about the girls who carried those eyes forward into a world that was imperfect and necessary and worth the trouble of fighting for. She got in her car. She drove home. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window with her hands wrapped around the mug and looked out at the yard and the aspens and the mountains, and she thought about all the things you cannot control and all the things you can, and the specific essential work of knowing the difference, which is not a thing you figure out once, but a thing you practice every day. The aspens along the back fence were coming in, just barely, just the first of it, the thin new green at the tips of the branches, tender and exact and absolutely certain of itself despite everything. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was the whole thing.